Hi, welcome to the Finding Harmony podcast. We're here today with a beautiful, amazing woman, Diana Christinson. Hi, Diana. How are you?
Oh, what the fuck? Normally you introduce me first as the co-host. What the?
I thought I'd do a little differently.
God damn. Somebody, you know what, Diana? She came to me the other day and she said, I want our podcast to be less biographical and more topical. And I said, I feel like I'm about to get demoted. Sure enough, very next
Right off the
podcast,
bat.
right out. I'm not
Boom.
even, someone's really exploring their space, I guess.
There
Oh
you
my
go.
God.
I'm the executive producer.
Should I be honored? I'm the first to get to start
exactly.
this new chapter in the Finding Harmony podcast.
You just get to witness my last episode. That's fine.
His last episode.
Well, I have an intro for the ladies at home.
Okay.
Doing their yoga practice this morning while they listen to a podcast on Sunday. Our dear friend, Diana Christinson, began her yoga practice in Kyoto, Nippon, in Japan in 1987, which inspired her lifelong studies of Eastern philosophy. She began teaching yoga in 1996. And in 1999, after practicing yoga for more than a decade, Diana took the first of 9 trips to India to study at the Ashtanga Yoga Institute, which I think is what it's called now.
I think it's called the Sharat Joyce Yoga Shala or Center.
That really rolls off the tongue. She founded Pacific Ashtanga Yoga Shala in 2005. She has a master's in psychology and is the author of a new book, and she's here to talk about it today, Your Golden Journey, which is really what this podcast is going to be about, Diana.
Your golden journey.
Your golden journey.
Yeah, I love it. I love it already.
Way to bring the energy.
I want to know. I'm asking a question. I'm disposing of your format.
What? No, I've got a question.
I want to ask a question. What were you doing in Japan?
It's on the question list. It's here.
I was teaching English, which was simply a vehicle to live in Japan.
Wow.
And I love that vehicle because the best way to get to know the people is just to jump in and have a little apartment and be speaking and listening and teaching and learning. And so really it was just it was like, as both of you understand, it was just this passion. Like I had been drawn to Japanese culture for years. And when I finished undergraduate, I just reached out to a couple different places and people to say, hey, can I get a job? And I was fortunate because I really wanted to live in Kyoto because it's one of the oldest and one of the cities that has survived the Second World War's destruction of so much, including their temples. So Kyoto was definitely like the place I wanted to be. So yeah, it was just a heart passion that took me there.
Yeah, it's so beautiful there.
My great-grandfather lived in Japan for 18 years. And so
wow.
I was similar.
After World War II.
Yeah, he ran a bowling alley in Tokyo, and I think it's Tokyo, honestly. I don't know actually.
It was Tokyo.
And so I had a reason I wanted to go to Japan, but I ended up teaching English in Korea about 10 years later in 98. And so I just wanted to know what sort of personal story do you have that made you want to admire Japanese culture?
It was more something within me. It was sort of, I think it's what pulls us to yoga. Like when we start to understand that there's something sometimes that's not outside of us, but inside of us that pulls us to different geographic locations or to different authors or, painting as you do, Russell, or dancing as Harmony did. It was really something very internal in me that pulled me, not just to anywhere in Asia, which I love so many places in Asia, but Japan in particular. And I remember that a lot of my students, especially my female students, would say, oh, Diana-san, you have such a Japanese heart. And I
so
like to think
nice.
it's something that in me that's very service oriented, and I don't know, but it meant a lot to me to have that connection. But interesting, I really only spent like a year in Japan before I then moved to Thailand. So I
Oh,
did bounce around Asia a bit, and
Yeah.
but I do, as you can see in the book Your Golden Journey, I have an affinity for that particular place in the world.
Yeah.
so how old were you when you moved there?
I was just out of so I had to be early 20s.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's for me too. I was about 21, and knowing now the brain doesn't fully develop until you're 25, it explains a lot of the issues that I had when I was there. What were there parts of it that was a struggle for you? 'Cause, like, for example, for me in Korea, I was a slow walker. I'm from Illinois, and I just like to kind of stroll and meander, and old people would shove me in the back to get me out of the way. Did you have kind of issues like that came up, the like culture shock that you're really surprised by? That's like, oh, this is different.
Yeah, it's such a fun question because one of the way the book is laid out, there are days and little teachings that go with the days, and
Mm.
in one of the teachings, I share that I had was so excited to move to Japan, and when I got there, it was like a huge disappointment, and I was unhappy. And
Oh.
I remember I stayed with a lovely family until my apartment was ready, and I remember going up on the rooftop to the very top in Japan and like looking down, and it was so noisy, and um, this feeling of not having my independence, but also, like breakfast were seaweed, and
Yeah.
yeah, I was
Yeah.
missing my like donuts and coffee, and I
Yeah.
remember like asking myself, like, what were you thinking? Why on earth did why did you do this? And but that was really the perfect beginning for me, because then it unfolded into this place that I really did want to be. And I managed my way through parts of it that were noisy and found the peaceful places.
Hmm.
And I think it was really getting to know the people, and moving towards temple and practices that made my life like what I wanted it to be there. But it took a while to get there. It wasn't
Yeah.
instant, that's for sure. It was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, that you remember the like, I think they're called pachinkos, but they're like the places where you go to like
Gambling.
gamble, that
Yeah.
Yeah.
were just like noise, bing, 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 bing,
Yeah.
bing.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fascinating. I that really resonates because I was really overwhelmed by the density of the cities and the enormity of people that they would pack into a place. And then you could transition out of that and find space and maybe even a spiritual life. And that transition was always really interesting. So I ended up being in the mountains a lot to find that space because I was kind of, just as a Midwesterner, I was overwhelmed.
Yeah. And you really can there. You can find those places. It's
Mhm.
an interesting place in the world because they do density very well.
Mhm.
Even how they manage to create Zen within a small place is part of their beauty,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
something I've carried with me for years, like how to find your expansion and sacred in small space and lots
Mhm.
of people around you.
Yeah. It's an interesting theme because we all, like, right after graduating university, went to Asia
It's true.
and like spent time
Yeah,
living there and being in that culture. So it kind of calls back to that like pull of your soul to a I don't know, to the East, or to like this Eastern sort of philosophy, way of living, way of being that, maybe was very different from what we were used to,
Mhm.
but also felt almost like, for me, it was almost like a home. Like it felt all of a sudden like, oh, this is what I've been looking for. Even
yeah,
though, maybe at first it was like, whoa, this place is crazy.
Mhm.
But the I don't know, maybe the aesthetic, the ethos, the philosophy behind it felt very much aligned with something inside, deep inside myself.
yeah. Very, like you said it so well, at home, which is
Mhm.
how I would imagine the two of you felt how I felt with yoga and Ashtanga in
Yeah.
particular. Like it just felt like a coming home to something that,
Mhm.
you know, so
Yeah.
there is that connection there.
Yeah. When you found yoga in Japan, or when yoga found you, was it Ashtanga yoga or was it another kind of yoga? And what like drew you to that?
No, it's funny you mentioned that. I just brought that up in a teaching this past year, and my students who've been with me for decades were intrigued because I hadn't spoke of it before. But
Mhm.
in Kyoto, I had always known I would love yoga. And so I'm from the Midwest as well, like Russell. And so I had tried different yogas. Nothing really resonated, but I knew yoga was on my path. Like it was like we were saying, like it was already within me. And so when I sought that in Kyoto, the teacher I found was just this beautiful woman who taught, it was not a vinyasa style at all. And she did a lot of her work with partners in her practice. And I used to ride we had 10 speeds back then. I used to ride my bike for, I don't know, like an hour to get there. And just some funny notes about my first real yoga experience was that we had to wear a black leotard,
Yeah.
sort of like dance, and fish. Am I saying that fish stockings, like the
Fishnet stockings?
fishnet stockings?
Oh my gosh.
And that was like your uniform. So I'd have to go like change into my uniform, and we would have this lovely practice with her. And her teacher was from northern Japan, and so there was really this sense of lineage that I had never known before, of like a teacher having a teacher and passing it down in parampara. And then at the end, we would always have tea together, and we would talk with our sensei about anything, like cooking, about our diet, or our it could be our yoga practice, but oftentimes it was about our health outside of our yoga. So it was really, it was very, it was a beautiful beginning to me of something that I would know, I would want in my future as something that was a lineage, and having a relationship with your teacher, and the beauty of passing that down to people. I remember when her teacher came to visit in Kyoto, how honored she was and how proud she was to introduce us, and for us to meet him, and so that really stayed with me, and it's something I hadn't experienced yet in the States.
Wow. Yeah, that also registers as well. One of the things that I realized going to Korea was just how American I was, and what I could identify as being American. For example, irreverence and not being respectful, and constantly looking to make some snotty remark was like that's my family, like that's that's the culture that we carry with us. And the Korean culture of that had so much respect embedded in the language, and the kind of language that used depending on whether you were speaking to a senior person or a superior person versus a friend. That really struck me and stayed with me, and has been kind of in conflict with me for a sense, is trying to find a sense of respect while also balancing this irreverence, which could be so inappropriate.
It's so Russell. I love it.
Where were you from in the Midwest?
I am from a town called Michigan City, Indiana.
I have lived there. Holy shit. My mom worked in LaPorte at a hospital, which is like what, 10 minutes away?
Yeah, 10 minutes away.
Holy smokes. Wow. Yeah. We lived on a little house right on Lake Michigan in Michigan City. What is your family still there?
Well, it's interesting because my parents moved here about around 13 years ago or so to be here, and they left Michigan City, Indiana, and my mom is there right now on a pilgrimage, and she hasn't been home for 4 or 5 years, and so we lived in a place, Russell, they called it Lake Michigan, Michiana Shores, or Long Beach. And so she's at a little beach cabin on the water, like right on the sand right now.
You must have found yourself going to Chicago all the time, and like as a family, or on when you wanted to go do fun stuff with your friends, you must have been up there all the time, maybe.
Yeah, you just jumped on the South Shore Railroad.
And there you were. Wow. Yeah. What did your parents do for work?
Well, it's a great question, actually, because it was one of the answers to some questions you had proposed that we might wind up talking about. My parents owned a little restaurant, a family restaurant in Michigan City, Indiana. First, my dad, he drove trains for a while. He drove the South Shore Railroad trains. And then he was such a dreamer and such a visionary. And at one point, he just had this vision to open our own little restaurant, kind of based on food that was being served in Chicago, which was, Midwesterns would know this, it was a Vienna sausage, which you couldn't get anywhere where we were. It was just a Chicago thing.
But you can get that in a can on Amazon.
Probably $500 a can. I was just kidding. But yeah, so my parents opened this little restaurant, and from the age 12, I worked in our family restaurant, and really got to know our customers were like family, and watched me grow up. I knew the names of their children and their dogs, and it was such a beautiful upbringing for me to grow up in this family business, this family restaurant. And so, later when I opened Pacific Ashtanga Yogashala, I realized how much I was drawing back to what I loved about my our family's business, our family restaurant, which is community. Which is community and bringing people together in a way that they feel seen and they feel heard and they get to know each other. And so I think one of my dedications, we dedicated part of it to my parents and their restaurant. And we just talked about, like, I used to know how people like their eggs and what they wanted in their coffee. And now I'm like, you like this Kapotasana adjustment, but you don't like this headstand adjustment.
Right. Service oriented.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very service oriented and very family, And I love that about Ashtanga. That's kind of comes back to something we had said about Sensei and Asia. It's like this love for our teacher and our teacher's love for their students. And, some of my students have been with me before I opened the Shalas, so over 20 years. Wow. So I've seen their children grow up and go to college and get married. And, we've seen each other through all kinds of chapters of our lives. And that's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Are you like a nice Lutheran family?
We're Irish Catholic.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Okay. All right. Christinson, that sort of struck me as Indiana Lutheran, but not, okay.
Irish Catholic.
Irish Catholic.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
No, because Christinson is Swedish. That was a married name. So my mom's maiden name is O'Shea.
Oh, and that Christinson is your dad's name?
No, her married
name. No, married name. Yeah.
Your married name. Are you married?
No.
Okay.
No longer.
Well, and your dad's name was O'Shea?
His last name was Burns, which was also, believe it or not, Scottish-Irish. So.
Yeah, that sounds Scottish-Irish. Okay. I don't think you're Swedish at all, though.
No, she's Irish.
Scottish-Irish. Just married into that for
my goodness,
a couple chapters of my life.
You see, we're all Irish. We're all
Scottish,
Swedish Lutherans from Chicago.
You.
The Lund family.
Yeah.
That's my mom's family. And they married these, Irish Hicks, literally. That's my mom's maiden name. And wow. And so I thought we may have an Irish Swedish Lutheran connection there for a moment. No. Okay, no.
Sorry.
Yeah,
our differences is what brings us together.
That's right. So when did you come across Ashtanga yoga?
Wait a second. I want to dig into your parents a bit more.
No,
can you the follow-up question?
Everyone wants to know about the Ashtanga yoga.
But this is really about them. Can you imagine your parents doing what you did? Can you imagine, but you're the result of them. Can you imagine them doing this? Going to India and doing all the stuff, going to Japan? Is there a piece of them?
My dad loved an adventure, but he'd never, he was so proud of every place I went. And they actually came to visit me in Thailand and Japan. And
oh, cool.
But it was, I think my dad and me largely that wanted to go out there and have adventures and, follow my passions. Not that it wasn't my mom as well, but he really loved that. So, yeah.
Oh. So before Harmony asks her follow-up question, you came back from Thailand and you decided you'd already been in university. Where did you go to university? In the Midwest?
Yeah, it was in the Midwest at a small liberal arts college, Taylor University.
University.
It was in the cornfields of Indiana. And yeah, I was really drawn to, it was interesting because it was a Christian school, but I was really drawn to world religion.
Okay.
And really one of the major reasons I found myself in Japan is I was interested in Buddhism. And that was a beautiful place to land and seep myself in Zen Buddhism. And then Thailand was interesting because there was Buddhism there, but as well Shintoism. And so it exposed me to even more of different just ways of, seeing God and walking that path of light. So I love that.
But then you came back home and you got a master's in psychology. And you didn't go into, say, the nunnery, for example.
Yeah. Although I did want to be a nun when I was younger. But yeah, no, I landed in Santa Barbara and I just had some great jobs in psychology there. Love the people I was working with. But if you are an undergraduate working in psychology, you realize you kind of need to get the next degree. And so I just had this wonderful opportunity on the East Coast to go to get my master's in psychology and then return back to the West Coast. And the path was unfolding for me there.
Wow, in Santa Barbara. And pretty close to Encinitas.
Yeah, but I didn't actually get into Ashtanga until I moved to Laguna Beach.
Okay. Yeah.
So it was after we moved to Laguna Beach after graduate school. And I, believe it or not, my first job I got out of graduate school was in domestic violence.
Oh, wow.
And I ran a shelter in Orange County. And then even after I had done that, I got a job with family court, a very special job. It was a new position in the court system in specializing in domestic violence and educating our court system, our judges and attorneys. And it was really an exciting job. But it was during that time that I met Tim Miller and started my Ashtanga path. Which led me to Pattabhi Jois and to India, but Tim was my primary teacher here in the States.
What was it like meeting him for the first time? Were you like
at the grocery store?
At the grocery store. No, were you just like enamored, or were you like, "What's this all about?" How'd you feel about it?
He's very handsome.
He's very handsome. It's such a. I feel like there's this pull that happens, and I was going to Yoga Works at the time. It was Yoga Place. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it was a big yoga company in the United States, and I was drawn to Ashtanga. So I had a teacher named Dawn. And there would be literally like 3 or 4 of us showing up for class, sometimes 8 people. And I just loved it. It really resonated with me. And this teacher had gone to Tim And so she brought him to Yoga Works for a workshop. And that's the first time I met him. And I remember thinking, oh, that's the person I want to study with. Like, that's the real deal. And then as fate would have it, the teacher who was teaching, she just stopped teaching. She stopped coming. And the person who owned Yoga Place at the time, now Yoga Works, got to know me, and she said, Diana, we just need you to teach. Can you teach these classes? And so by default, I wound up being an Ashtanga teacher before I ever knew what it meant to really be an Ashtanga student. But that was my path.
I think that's actually true for all of us.
I think so too, Russell. I think so true.
Yeah. Especially like, the old school ones.
I started teaching, and it's like, wait a second, I don't know anything about this.
I don't know what I'm doing.
No.
Maybe I should go to India.
Maybe I should go to India.
Yeah. So I started to study with Tim, and it was an hour drive. And when I should get my old books out, he had his first teacher training for Ashtanga teacher training, and I was at his first teacher training.
Wow.
And so
what year was that?
How the path, I know, I knew you were going to ask me that. I'm like, the books behind me, like, just to entertain you.
Yeah, just to tantalize.
I know.
Our imaginations.
Ooh,
2000. Cool.
Yeah.
That book looks really familiar, huh?
Well, it has Tim's logo on it.
So.
Tim's logo on
that
it.
Makes sense. Yeah. That's why it looks so
I attended Tim's very first second series teacher training, which was also
Oh, nice.
So, you know.
That's fun.
So, yeah. But what was fun is I actually had gone to India before I took my teacher training, even with Timmy. So,
oh wow,
it's all like how those things kind of
it
just unfold. You know, I look at the world now of teacher training and the path, and it's evolved so much since those early days when there wasn't a lot available to us. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. What drew you to India, though?
Pattabhi Joyce. I met him I remember studying with Tim, and Tim would talk about Pattabhi Joyce in such a loving way. Again, it kind of gets back to this idea of a teacher having a teacher and passing it on. And he just always told such stories of love, with love, about Pattabhi Joyce. And then I remember thinking, like, how sad. I was working for the courts at the time, which is such a 8 to 5 Monday through Friday job. I remember thinking how sad I'll never meet him. And then honestly, it seemed like the next day, but of course it was probably like a month later, but it was soon thereafter that Tim announced that Pattabhi Joyce was doing a world tour. Remember the world tours?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so on,
I remember always the last world tour.
Yes, the last world tour.
I would tell my students, make sure you go, because this is the last world tour.
Yeah.
And then 2 years later, be like, no, make sure you go,
this
because
is
the last world tour.
Exactly.
Yeah, but then it was the same thing. I met Pattabhi Joyce, and it was such a powerful experience to be in this gymnasium with 250 people. And
wow.
And I thought again, I'm like, I want to go to India. I think Pattabhi Joyce, every person he met, it was like 250 of us waiting in line to thank him after class. I think every person said, "You coming to India?" And it felt very personal.
Yeah, it does.
It felt so personal. Like, yes, I must come to India.
Yeah.
It's something. Maybe it's a kind of star power, being starstruck, but there's something electric about that first time. Is like, you know, if Steven Seagal had met you and told you to come to India, like, you would have taken it just as seriously. But it's like, it was for me, it was like overwhelming to meet him. And then, you know, he adjusted my hand in Pajra Konasana, and I was just like, it was like love at first sight for me.
Yeah, I really believe that there are something sacred about having a connection with a teacher, you know, and that teacher having a love for. I remember Guruji really loving his students and making us all feel so loved by him, and that being very authentic and genuine. And I do think that's I hope everyone has that experience in a lifetime. And for us, then the three of us as teachers, to pass it on that way, to be excited about someone wanting to learn yoga and Ashtanga and really loving that, you know, it is parampara to pass on that like genuine love.
Yeah. No, it's a powerful experience, I think, when you enter into that energy field of someone who also like has a really strong pull of energy, or like a lot of that yogic, you know, energy they've cultivated over years and years and years. It's a different feeling than just like, you know, people you meet in the grocery store or something.
Yeah.
Not to say you can't meet these people in the grocery store, because you can.
What was your first trip like then? When you how did you, one, get the resources to go, get the time, carve out the space, go there, the first day, which is always a nightmare? Can you walk us through that whole thing?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to carve out a little bit of time from my work schedule at the courts. I was working for family court at the time, which only meant I could take a couple weeks off. And you know, traveling to India
takes a couple weeks.
Exactly.
It takes like a week to get there and a week to get back.
Yes, to acclimate. So I was so unusual because as you know, everyone who goes there is there for a month, 3 months, 6 months, a year. And here I was making this journey, and but it was so worth. Every day was precious to me. I felt overwhelmed by India, and at the same time I had lived in Thailand, and so I was prepared for some of the hardest things about India, which is walking through the streets and the poverty. And but I remember going to the house. I mean, you look at the address and you get to this like a little house in this little neighborhood in Lakshmipuram. I'm like, is this it?
Yeah.
Could this be it? Like this little sign or whatever. Knock on the door and have Patabi Joyce answer. And it was this like old, the experience to me is so precious because it's like, yes, you coming in, you know, I want to study yoga with you. Yeah, I felt like the person, Krishnamacharya, like going up into the cave and, you know, knocking on the door. Will you teach me yoga? You know.
Were you by yourself there?
I was with my husband, who did not go with me to meet Patabi Joyce, so I went by myself for that part. And I was so glad I did, because it was really like my pilgrimage, you know. You really think of like writing your golden journey, like what it means to be on a pilgrimage, but it was my pilgrimage. And so he welcomed me in, and you know, you enter at that little space that people would gather for conference, like this little waiting room kind of lovely area. And then we went upstairs to the top where his, you know, kind of office was just this desk. And I remember he had this huge book that seemed like the book of life. And he opened up this book, you know, everything's very slow. And he asked my name.
Yeah.
And as he write down my name, he asked my mother's name. And I told him my mother's name.
That's so,
and
yeah, he did that. That's so weird.
It was, yeah, I just remember that being such a beautiful, slow, old school, like, and just, yeah, and the exchange, and then him telling me like what time to come in the morning the next day, which, as you know, like people were starting at 4 or 4:30, and I think I was coming at 7. You know, I was like the last person, probably. And when I got there, it was this amazing experience where at the very bottom floor was a practice room. And I always remember like 12 people in the room. I'm sure everyone has, I don't know if it was 15 or exactly how many, but it was the way they were faced. And then Patabi Joyce had a little stool that he would sit on when he needed to rest. And then when you got there, you had to go to the very end of the line, which was winding down the staircase. And so I wound up at the top on the roof of the house.
Yeah.
Every morning I would start off on the roof of the house.
Yeah.
We'd have our books with us. So I had my like Bhagavad Gita,
Yeah.
right? And then as you go down the stairs, you're reading the Gita or talking to the people in line with you. And then you get halfway down, there's a bathroom. Oh, yay, before, you know.
People would hold your
So
spot for the bathroom?
Yeah.
in the line, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. How long did it take to make your way from the roof to the practice room?
Well, it took at least an hour. That's such a great question. It's been so long ago now. It took at least an hour, if not an hour and a half.
Wow.
Amazing.
Wow. And that was like 50 people at the time? So I think I remember like Greg Nardi telling me once, like right before it moved to Gokulam, it was 50, 60 people, and it just seemed like so many people. It was just overwhelming.
It seemed like so many people because so many folks had gone before me, and then I was waiting with it seemed like a bunch of people. But remember, we were on a little staircase.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's hard to say. And even when we would meet for that once a week, what we call conference now, we were packed in this little room. And I think there at that time, could not have been more than 20, 25 of us at least packed in that room for that little conference time.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Do you remember him at that time? I guess you would have made a number of trips where this conversation happened. So I should probably ask you why you came back. But I'm also I'm wondering, like, if you remember people talking about, we're going to move to a new neighborhood. We're going to move to this place called Gokulam. And if you'd experienced that or heard about that.
I was a bit far from that, because if I'm right, and you guys have the date so much better than I do, it took a couple years, right? Like we kept hearing that Patabi Joyce was making it. He was making it, and Tim would remind me, like, it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of workers to do what Patabi Joyce is doing, which is to make this new. Really, it was his dream. It was his dream because we could all be practicing together or in larger groups. Who knew that Patabi Joyce would keep getting so popular that then there would be groups of people, 20 in a waiting room, waiting to get in for their turn of 80 people in a room, But I really with Tim, we just kept hearing he was working on it.
Okay.
It's like the world tour, like coming soon.
Coming soon.
But and again, I felt lucky. I was there within the first 3 months of it opening, and I feel like we might have overlapped then too, as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think I was there 3 months after it opened in May 2003. I think was when
That's right. It was 2003. So
Yeah.
it took me a while to get back, but I got back for the opening. I felt like it was exciting.
So you were there for, did you stay on your first trip? Was it the 2-3 weeks like you said, or did you end up staying longer, or then you came back home?
Yeah, I could really literally only stay for a couple weeks. So it was, there was part of me that was a little bit jealous of the people that were able to really seep and stay longer and get into it. But honestly, I felt so grateful that I think the gratitude was, I just was so grateful I had that experience, and it meant so much to me. So, and it was challenging for me. I was not that person who got to go and stay for a long time because of my life. So whenever I went, whether it was, most of my trips were a month. And at one point when I was going to be authorized that trip, I stayed for 3 months. But it was really hard for me to break away from the life I had created here to spend that time there.
Sure. And how did that eventually transition? How did it happen that you ended up, going from, being a psychologist or working at the, training the legal profession to then being a professional yoga teacher?
Such a beautiful marriage of my passions, because I started at Yoga Works, Yoga Place, and I taught Ashtanga there for a while, and it was clear, like, it was hard to have a Mysore program, and the owner really loved and valued what I did, but it was such a small part of the bigger of what, really what their mission statement was about. And so I waited until I had my authorization. And then when I was authorized, it was so great to be authorized by Patabi Joyce and Sharat. I was looking for a place and looking to make that transition. And I had already started to make a transition in my career a little bit. So I was part-time at the courts and started teaching part-time and trying to make my way that direction. And then when I kind of secured a
tough
space,
to tell your that you're going to go part-time. I mean, you're going to lose income. There's how do you make that? How do you come to that decision and then, act on it?
Yeah. I have to credit my partner at the time, because he was incredibly supportive, and he was very supportive of that trip to India and then coming back and really, but it's hard. I will say that making that decision to have, and not just a yoga studio, right? An Ashtanga school is very different, and than running what we see as other forms of yoga with different teachers and different levels and different, which is, but I was so driven. I don't say driven, I was so drawn to that. So finding the right place, or any place for that matter, and then having just a handful of students that went with me, and it wasn't a lot at the time, but that handful of students that went with me, and that we kind of built it from that core group. And a lot of those folks are still with me today, which is why I say I've had some people that have been practicing with me for, well over 20 years.
Yeah, wow.
Did I understand you that they would also come with you to India at the same time? Is that what you're saying?
Come to her school.
Come to her
she
school.
opened.
Yeah, because I had to leave Works Yoga Place,
and they came with you there. Okay,
and they came with me from there. Yeah,
okay,
so that was how that sort of happened. But it was, what does the Guruji say? Go find a tree and teach under it. So to go find a tree, but sort of to answer your bigger question, it's kind of a fun little story. I was studying with Sharad in Australia, in Byron Bay, and I had asked him this question. I said, my students are very inquisitive about the poses and about the philosophy, and I'm really a stickler for having a silent room. I really like the sound and breath, and people really like being in their own, so I really tried to create an atmosphere of meditation, of internal meditation. And so I'm like, when do people get to ask these questions? And Shirat said, well, you have to do conference. Once a week you have conference, and people ask questions in you. And so that was when I started doing conferences. And I remember at first was like, how we do when we were in India, right? With Patapi, Joyce, and Shirat, it'd be like, who has a question? And what I found is after a few weeks or so, like hardly anyone wanted to ask a question or had a question. And so I just started preparing these teachings. And the teachings, believe it or not, were, they had so much Eastern philosophy and psychology and neuropsychology. And you see these books, on the bookshelf behind me, they're just filled with Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and the Dalai Lama and Bishop Tutu's Book of Joy, and one of my favorite leaders in positive psychology, Sean Aker at Harvard University. And so I just started introducing all these teachings and weaving them into yoga in a way that, we could be studying something that was, based in this idea that I want to become the best version of myself. And I use yoga as the vehicle. I have a semester study now. So we started this so many years ago, and now we have a semester study. And when that semester is over, I come up with some new idea. But the semester we're on right now is ascending into lightness, because last semester we were talking about the path of enlightenment. I'm like, wow, that seems like such a big order. Like, we're supposed to be becoming enlightened. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
So we talked about, well, what is enlightenment? I was saying it's becoming light beings, like light in how we show up for life, and light in what we give. And so then this semester we dovetailed off that, and we were talking about, well, how do you use yoga to become a light being, to become enlightenment? So I said, the tagline was the physiology and spirituality of yoga. We started with our feet and went to our knees, and we're now on the hips, which I'm having trouble getting past because there's so much to talk about with the hips and psoas. But I just wind up, like, this semester weaving in my favorite person who is a specialist in the psoas muscle with Carolyn Meese, Anatomy of the Spirit. And
Mm-hmm.
I just love all that. So I feel like
Yeah.
psychology and energy work and the physiology of the things that we're doing and any of the poses we're doing just lends itself to them weaving together each week.
That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
totally.
That sounds like a very unified
approach.
Yeah. You're referring to the lectures that you do at Chapman University. Is that right?
No, those are
conferences
the
in her yoga school class.
Oh, okay. Because
in her yoga school or conferences.
Well, she mentioned
weekly.
the word semester, and so I thought she
Oh,
mentioned.
I think you created your own kind
semester.
of semester.
I
right?
did. I created my own semester, and that also came from wanting to call the Pacific Ashtanga not studio, but call it Shala as school, and to really ask my students to be students and to be thirsty to learn. And so the semester felt like a good way of also just creating a language around, like, we're going to study for this amount of time. Bring your journals, buy these books, or listen to these videos I'm asking you to listen to and study,
That's beautiful. Yeah. So it's so needed in a yoga school, I think, especially the Ashtanga school, because people come and they practice and it becomes a very physical practice, which is, healthy and good. But it's like the deeper yoga, the deeper teachings are really so much embedded in that, like, psychology and in that philosophy and in how you're living and bringing these teachings to life. And you can only really, like, for me, people say, like, oh, you do your practice and yamas and niyamas coming, or like yoga's just coming. It's like, yeah, kinda.
Yeah.
Right?
All is coming,
like,
including poverty.
Well, like, you have to actually, like, think about it and, like, read about it and study it, and you have to have that element of self reflection, of swadhyaya, of self study, of studying not just your own self but like higher self, and how you're aligning with that. And I think it's just so important to have that if you are, like, really practicing yoga, and to have a teacher to help you.
Yeah, I think when all goes well, our practice makes us thirsty for that. It's like I always describe the asana as Mushika, the little mouse that hangs out with Ganesh, who's interestingly enough the vehicle, Ganesh's vehicle, like a little motorcycle. But I'm always like, the asana is just a vehicle that takes us to these other places of self svadhyaya, getting close to yourself. I love the translation for svadhyaya. It's like, it's not just self-study, but when you really boil it down, it's like, it's sva meaning self, and adhyaya, getting close to something. And in my years of psychology, I'm like, oh, we really get so far away from ourselves. Like, with yoga is an opportunity to get to know yourself, to get close to yourself.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I was really impressed, kind of going through your biography and reading about your book, and might be an interesting time to talk more about the development of that book. But it just seemed to me that your life plan was so unified and clear, just from the outside looking in. I'm not sure that was true for Harmony. I mean, like, you were a dancer, and then you were a banker. I was a painter, and I was a schmuck, and it's sort of like at a very different. We were very, very different. It's a kind of a stop-start approach to our life plan, but it seemed like you really, like, you couldn't have scripted it better for yourself. And I wonder if you feel that way from the inside.
Yeah, I really, some of the questions you asked, Russell, and this is one of them that really gave me an opportunity for some svadhyayas, for some self-reflection, and to say, I just sit in gratitude, because from a young age of, I actually did want to be a nun. So just sort of like being that person that had this spiritual path, and really letting it unfold from, like, honoring Christianity and also expanding from that, and loving the work that we do with our body. I really think psychology too is coming back around to there's only a certain amount we can do with cognition, and some things we just have to do in the body. There's more modalities towards that right now. And so I even feel like I couldn't have scripted that better to be, working with people in their trauma, or working with people in their challenges, and saying, yes, I want to help you read Viktor Frankl, or I want to help you, look at your practices that you do in your emotional practices, but also to use our physical practices and our breath practices to bring us to what I like to refer to as our vibrant health. Like I said, that I couldn't have unfolded it any better than it has, or just being really happy at how it has unfolded.
One phrase that Frankl uses that I cherish is that no act of beauty is ever lost, or no act of kindness is ever lost. And so I think it's something that he may have come up with when he was in the concentration camps, is that you can make some little art and thing here and it won't be lost. Even I think that's such a beautiful way to maintain a balance of mind when you're in such desperate conditions as he was in.
Yes. So I mean, there's so many. We've done semesters on different things at the Shala, and it seems like one of our mantras is a Viktor Frankl quote at the Shala. I have a couple mantras that are quotes from some of my favorite authors, but there are so many teachings in that one book, Man's Search for Meaning. And I think there's so much of our yoga in there as well, that we create this space in between in our yoga, and we make choices, and I think that is the yogi's path, is that we become more mindful and less mindless, and even then the challenges in our life, when people look at their challenges and say, I can't handle this is too much. We can go back to Nelson Mandela, we can go back to Viktor Frankl, and really look at their words as a guide on our path. And and say, yes, we can. And here's a guide who's helping us today, from back then. So I just really, we really do at our school read that book at least twice a year, but we use different quotes as a mantra that I just love.
It's beautiful, because you can get really frustrated sometimes about whether or not people are paying attention to you, so it's enough just to go in and make something beautiful or do something kind, and whether people notice or not, like Krishna, you can just keep practicing. It's fine.
Yeah.
What's one of the mantras of your Shala? Can you share it with us?
One of the mantras is by Annie Dillard, who's also one of my favorite authors. She said, how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. And then I added to that for our yoga students, how we spend our moments is how we spend our days. And, it's such a lesson of impermanence, and it just brings us back to the moment we're living right now. And am I doing that well? As Russell said, am I doing that with beauty? Am I doing that with love? So yeah, that's one of our mantras.
Love it.
That's so lovely.
A friend of mine, Melody Baker, she was coming, and you were offering like a meditation, like a month-long meditation program, I think, at one point. And she was coming in to practice with you and sit and do like this meditation challenge, was it? I forget exactly.
Melody from Palm Desert.
Yeah.
Yes, I love her. She's such a sweetheart. We were supposed to go to Morocco together, but that got canceled a couple years ago because of COVID. Yeah.
Whoa, we're well. My goodness. Okay.
We were going to, but no. So she was one of the folks that came to our studio to go through a program called One Precious Life, and it was a meditation and program on impermanence, and I actually wound up presenting that at the Confluence as well. I was very grateful to be able to present it there, but And I'm not sure if the two of you are familiar with, a few years back, I lost my husband to brain cancer. And
Oh,
he was a
sorry.
beautiful, beautiful human being.
oh,
And
I didn't know that. No, I'm sorry.
yes, and he was also a Dzogchen practitioner, which is a very specific type of Tibetan Buddhism. And after his passing, I just felt so moved to share with everybody that we don't get to do this forever, and the people we love, that we think, I think we take a lot of things for granted. It's just a way to really dig deep into how precious life is. So one of the mantras at the Shala is also a Mary Oliver quote. I'm sure you're both very familiar with, which is a question Mary Oliver asks us: tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild, precious life?
Yeah, I love that quote.
So that's the one. So this program was really based on that quote, which is one of Richard's favorite quotes. My husband passed. So yeah, so Melanie came to that, and it was really, that was the first time I actually led that program. And so it was really powerful, and it was powerful having her be part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you were meditating every day or something along those lines?
So it started as a 48-day meditation. Richard was this vibrant football coach and high school teacher, and his brain tumor was completely took us by surprise. He was kind of dizzy for, I would say, I always tell you it was less than 2 weeks that we thought he had vertigo. And by the time he went to the ER, we found he had glioblastoma, and 48 days later he passed. And so I based the practice on those 48 days. And so what she committed to was 48 days of practicing what it feels like to say, I don't get to do this forever. The people I love, we don't get to do this forever. How can I show up and live today?
When was this that he passed?
He's passed just over 5 years. It's just been a little over 5 years now.
Oh my goodness.
Incredible. That's so powerful.
Yeah, so
I would have, I can't even imagine how you could get out of bed.
Yeah, it's I have such a heart place for people going through grief, because it's one of those things that we will all experience in our lifetime. We all have in one way or another, but losing someone really close to you, I just have such empathy and compassion for that. And of course, I'm involved with different groups in cancer, and stayed involved with that as well. But it's my father passed actually 2 years ago, and I felt like I was able to walk my mother through his passing more in the way that I was right next to Richard during his passing. And my mom, although I was with my father a lot, my mom was next to him all the time. So I have such a love for caregivers and loss, and it's all something that until you really walk through it, it's so hard to describe, and yet you want to, because I always want people to, I want to share with people, like, stay close to your last breath. Just stay really close to that last breath, because it'll change the way you're living today.
Yeah, that's so powerful.
Gosh.
Yeah, losing the people close to us is like a small death. We get to experience that, how, like, I guess, integrated we are, and how, like, a part of us also goes with them too, right?
Yeah, I keep sharing some of the bits of the book here and there, but one of the days is called the We of Me. And I always feel like the people that you become closest to become like woven into the fiber of you. And so there's this I'm wearing Richard's mala, because it's like, oh, this special, I'm doing a podcast with Harmony and Russell. So I always want to wear his mala when I do something special. But it's just a physical little reminder for what's already woven, that is such we carry such parts of each other inside of us that is beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. So
how did the two of you meet?
Well, Russell, we actually met in yoga.
Cool.
But I think it was really more of a fix-up, because I had told myself I would never date a yoga student.
Yeah, for good reason.
And two of my dear friends that are also students were playing matchmaker. And what the husband was a coach, and he was a football coach with Richard. And they both did yoga, and none of the other coaches did yoga. They thought they were weirdos, and they really couldn't talk about it with the other coaches. It was, not cool. So they had this thing in common. And so Richard was going to Bikram at the time. And so Scott said, you have to come try this Ashtanga stuff.
Yeah.
And he's like, he really liked the kind of yoga he was doing. He's like, but my teacher is single, and she's, whatever guy would say,
she's a cute blonde.
I didn't think he used the word pretty, yeah, or whatever.
I recommend them.
So he starts coming to classes, and then my friend, she's like, he thinks you're cute. Can he have your number? And my students laugh because my phone number's on everything.
Right.
And they're like, everyone has your phone number. But honestly, I didn't think we would have anything in common, because he was his football coach, and whatever was in my head. But our first conversation, he said, I meditate. And I'm thinking, this is terrible of me. I was like, yeah, everybody meditates.
Right. Yeah.
My mind or whatever.
Sure, as you do.
Right. And then he said, yes, I study Dzogchen Buddhism. I'm like, well, wait, that's interesting, because I'm into Tibetan Buddhism. And so I'm into Buddhism. I'm specifically into Tibetan Buddhism. And the next thing he's like, yeah, I study with Lama Surya Das. And I'm like, what? I was like asking Lama Surya Das to teach at our school, So,
amazing.
Anyway, this is one of those great stories of how two paths, how could we have ever met? And I think, well, how could we not?
Yeah.
Is he a Notre Dame guy?
No, but he said his most memorable game was playing Notre Dame. He was UCLA.
He was UCLA.
He played for UCLA. Yeah.
He played for the Bruins.
No, he played for the Trojans. Did I say it wrong? UCLA?
Maybe one of USC Trojans, right?
Trojans,
UCLA Bruins, USC Trojans. That's
the Trojans. Yeah,
that's a USC was a powerhouse. And what was his? Was he like a Chargers guy as well?
He was a lineman, so he was huge.
A Chargers would be a professional football team in the Southwest.
Like a fan, you mean?
Was he a fan of the Chargers?
Oh my gosh.
No, he was a fan of hockey. So yeah, I don't know.
Wow. Okay, but he was a lineman.
Me on that one.
Yeah,
he was a lineman.
Everyone knows
he was a Charger. He charged. He was a lineman.
Yeah. Exactly. Those are the real nerds of the football team. The smartest guys are the offensive linemen. Those are like the brainiacs on the team, because they they really have such a precise understanding of leverage and footwork and pattern that you really need those guys to be your smartest guys. The guys that they're playing against are ballroom brawlers, and they're trying to get past them. So yeah.
Yes, no, Richard would say that. And the thing it's something I loved about him is he would say we are they are overthinking everything, but the little plays and stuff. But I would see his notepads that had X's and O's and lines of all the, ideas he was coming up with. And right underneath it would be a quote by the Dalai Lama, or he was a unique human being. He really is. I love that about him.
That's fantastic.
And so you both shared the same. Did you go into this similar style of Tibetan meditation as well, studying with the Lama?
Well, when I was in India a couple times, I went to Belakupe, and I had already been drawn to
the Tibetan settlement.
Yes, I had really been drawn to the Dalai Lama and his writing because he was so steeped in psychology
Yeah.
and really a pioneer in neuropsychology. And so I was already doing a lot of reading and really resonating with the Dalai Lama. So his Tibetan Buddhism and really as what we would refer to now as Buddhist psychology. And then when I was in India, I was making that pilgrimage then to Belakupe, where I met Chuseng Rinpoche, which is another crazy story, but we became friends, and he comes to visit about once a year as well. So the Shala itself has a really lovely connection to Tibetan Buddhism. So
yeah,
just lovely friendships.
I know we're kind of running out of time, but there's two topics I really want to get to, and one of them is one of those crazy times that you've had in India, and the image that I have in my mind is of this crazy trip in 2010 where we were all together and Harmony was pregnant and I was acting like I wasn't married, and you were asleep in a taxi driving from Bangalore to Mysore and abruptly woken by a car accident. I wonder if you could talk to us about that and how that was really transformative for you. That changed your life, that car accident.
Yeah, it did, because first off, taxi. I mean,
yeah.
I remember going to get my luggage and going to load it in the car, and that particular time, the car that was picking me up it just looked small, and the person who was going to be driving it looked to be like 12 years old. And I remember Shelley Washington, who she and I are friends, were going to be arriving the same day, but our flights were 2 hours apart.
Yeah.
And I had made the decision, instead of waiting for, because remember the airport at the time, oh my gosh, I made the decision to go ahead, like fight through the mosquitoes, get in the car and just drive. And so it's interesting because Shelley and her driver wound up passing our accident, not knowing it was me.
Wow.
Oh, I remember
and
that.
Her driver recognized the car and said, that's one of our drivers, that's one of our cars. And by the time Shelley had passed, someone had already stolen my luggage, everything, almost everything I had. Thank goodness I had computer with me. I had my computer on me. Yeah. They had stolen my luggage and all the tires off the car by the time Shelley had drove past.
Oh my gosh.
So
was the driver unconscious? You were unconscious at the time, and it was just like, how do you have time to get the tires off the car?
You know what happened is the person who hit us was a lorry truck, and they were just figuring out like what to do. And in that amount of time, there was like literally a herd of people around the car, and complete strangers took me to the hospital.
Wow.
I almost like, now I can't believe, what else do you do? It was some crazy time, like, I don't know, 12 at midnight. I mean, I don't know, but I went with strangers. It took me, right? Yeah, it was the middle of the night. It took me to a hospital, and interesting, I should knock on some wood. That's the only time I'd ever been or have ever been in a hospital. So to be in an Indian hospital for the first time was interesting.
Yeah, it's intense.
Yeah. Have you been in Indian hospitals?
Yeah, I had my appendix taken out.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, a couple of years
before that. I kind of remember
that.
Hearing that story. Yes.
It was a bit sketchy, bit scary.
Did you break dangerous. Did you break some cervical discs or something like that? Did you?
No.
What happened to you?
I
your shoulder, your wrist or something, I remember.
No, it was my neck.
Your neck.
It was all my neck.
Yeah. All the neck, okay.
So yeah, it was and I still have the herniated discs in my neck and some little permanent damage there. So I don't do certain poses from certain series. So I have a very creative, like some a second and third. And
yeah, that's good.
But yeah, no, I'm grateful that I walked away from that. That's what I just kept sharing with everyone. I was just really grateful I walked away from it. But I really couldn't get back on a plane and go home, although some of my friends and family wanted me to come back for treatment. The doctors in India said, you just can't fly with this. So that's how I wound up staying in my little apartment for a month while you guys were going to classes every day with Sherrod. Shelly would go and she would come back to my apartment and report everything that happened, all the good stuff, of course, and keep me posted, and until eventually I could come out of the apartment and go sit in the corner of class and listen. And it was a very interesting time in my life, because and again, this is all in the book, so I'm giving away a great deal of the book, but one of the teachings in the book is I make my path. And I started with an Alice in Wonderland quote from the movie, where Alice is about to do something, and I forget, the Mad Hatter says, like, no, that's, they knew her destiny, and they're like, no, that's not what you're supposed to do, or whatever. And Alice says, no, I make my path. And so I started by saying, I wasn't supposed to go to India and be in a car accident. I wasn't supposed to, and I had just started a divorce with my husband of 19 years. Oh, wow. And so it was a time in my life where it was like being taken down to your bones, of like, who are you? What are you? What do you stand for? What are you about?
Just so I understand this, that was a divorce with Mr. Christinson in 2010. And then you were widowed now to your next husband.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's funny how sometimes like all of the things happen at all the same time, just to like completely like bring you to a full stop, full halt, like make you look at everything.
And I really could, because there was no place to run and get busy and do or whatever. I was in this tiny little apartment in Gokulam, and the things precious to me were actually stolen. And so in every way, it was like literally like the things you thought you had come with that would give you some comfort weren't there. And it was but it was powerful, because I think for all of us to come to that place, and we've all have different times in our life when we come to those places where you stop in your tracks and say, okay, what's important to me, and who am I, and where do I want to go from here, and what do I stand for? How do I want to stand in this? Like, for a month, I just really got to be with all of that, and really came out of it so strong.
Yeah, wow, incredible.
I wonder if you could tell us now, because you have these lessons, and you've had some horrific things happen to you, and yet you seem to carry this balance of mind with you, and these practices that support you. How do you get to the place where you decide to sit down to write a book?
I have wanted to. I love teaching so much, and I love the teaching so much that at different points in my teaching career, I think I've wanted to be like, I want to put this writing note. I want to write a book on, and I love, just one of the many topics in there is wabi sabi from Japan, like, and so I would, to people closest to me, I would say like, I'm going to write a book on, and so I would say this, and so my father, as he was, we had a very close relationship, and as my dad was getting close to passing, and we were spending just this really beautiful time together, I said to him, it was actually for Christmas, it's like, I just gave him two things. I gave him a little stone heart that he could hold in his hand, and I told him whenever I couldn't be there to hold his hand, I wanted him to have this stone to remember I was holding his hand. And when I would be there, he'd like for us to hold it together. And the second thing I gave him was I promised him that I would write a book, because I had talked about it so much. And I said, I am going to write a book and dedicate it to you. And so the first thing I wrote, and this was 2-3 years ago, was my dedication to my dad. And then COVID happened. And I closed my wellness center. I had a wellness center at the time. The studio closed temporarily. And as you know, it just was a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of coming out of it on the other end, I just felt I was starting to feel like I made my dad this promise and I want to do this and you'll never have time. You must know that, like, whenever
Mm-hmm.
anyone says you want to write a book, I'm like, you will, give yourself a year on an island. Like, you'll never have time to write the book.
Yeah.
And so it was this very, I'm just telling you just how it unfolded for me. The truth of the story is I live on this really unique piece of property in Laguna Beach. And there was this trailer, like no one even knows where it is. It was like in the middle of nowhere on the side of the hill. And I walked my dogs up there with just overgrown grass and trees and stuff. And I sat on the deck of the trailer and I said, this is my Walden Pond.
Mm-hmm.
I want to this is where I want to write my book. And I want to give myself 6 months to just be here every day when I'm not at my yoga school. And I want to make this thing happen. And so I called my landlord and I said, hey, can I rent this quirky rundown little trailer up here and write this book that I want to write? And I think I had to speak it. I had to make a commitment to this little space that I called my Walden Pond. And I had to make a commitment to important people in my life. And it kind of gathered a team that would support me in writing and editing. And my mom was probably my most fierce editor.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah, but that's really how, and I set a goal, like it would be done by the state, it would go to an editor by the state, and it would be published by my dad's birthday. Oh. And so the book actually was on Amazon for his birthday.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, it's so touching.
And maybe you could tell us a bit about what you want to fix with the book and who you want to speak
what
to.
What you want to fix.
I really see any teaching as parampara is just a light that we were given that we pass on to someone else. And sometimes, you feel like when you're like at the school, like I'm teaching to the beautiful people in front of me. And so every single day, there's 45 days of teachings in here. Those were given to people. And I just wrote down what they were already given to people that I loved. And so we talked oftentimes about like the shala without walls, the school without walls, and giving that light to people who weren't sitting in the room, that didn't call themselves Ashtangis. And because they were so universal, there's literally no yoga in this book. There's not a single yoga, quote unquote, teaching in the book. And so I really wanted to share this with anyone that was thirsty for some light on their path. And that's really what the book has become. It asks people to make a commitment to themselves, a short morning meditation where they devote to silence and to listening to themselves and to a gratitude practice. And then the teachings just kind of give them this little something to add, this like little tools in your toolbox of like how you show up and live the precious moments of your life. And so in that, we've just celebrated our 7th month anniversary since it was published. And I brought it to, it's sort of exciting stuff for me, is to a principal wanted his entire staff to have the book.
Wow.
So the teachers, the janitors, the psychologists. I just did a presentation with the National Parkinson Organization. And it's going to Chapman.
Beautiful.
In 2003, it'll be used in their curriculum, but also this year it was at Irvine College. So it's very grassroots. I mean, I literally put the book in my favorite people's like waiting room with a little note on top of it that says open to any page and get some inspiration, like very grassroots. And I appreciate being with the two of you and you allowing me to share it with your tribe and your people. And I just feel like it's light. It's what we do. It's what you do, Harmony and Russell. Like we just take what we've been given and we just pass it on.
Yeah. It's so beautiful to you say there's no yoga in the book, but I feel like from what you've shared with us also that the whole thing is yoga, because isn't yoga just like how we're living our lives and how we're connecting to, like you say, that space within every day. To me, that's like the entire practice of yoga. So I feel like your whole book's about yoga.
it is, without me putting yoga on the cover. So people would pick it up who are my mom's friends and
exactly. Yeah, I think it's sometimes we put the yoga in like this box that it has to, you know, be in our black leotards and fishnet stockings.
Yeah, that is the only way.
Yeah, but it's so much more than that, and it's so much about what you've been speaking to and how you've like lived your whole life, like integrating all these threads and weaving them together into this beautiful tapestry of living, right? Living the teachings and making them come alive in your day-to-day life. And like you said, focusing on that one breath, like, you know, connecting to that impermanence, connecting to that deeper meaning as well.
Yeah. It's so true. I mean, I tell my students, I always say thank you, because this book has been born from that relationship, from those teachings. And you know, I always say this is the one practice we do that should affect the other 22 hours of our lives. You know, so
23.
So you don't practice for 2 hours anymore?
Yeah.
I love a good 1 hour practice.
I just want to say that this was I'm unexpectedly moved, and I'm really grateful that you would come on and share with us and talk to us about your book, your golden journey. And I'm just really impressed how you seem so well together and so well directed and grounded in your life, and yet, you know, bad things continue to happen to good people, and I'm just but you still, like, you just still have so much light and presence and goodness about you that I'm really impressed.
Thank you for saying that. I remember one of my girlfriends was describing to the yoga students why I couldn't be there. Richard had passed, and it was a Sunday or something, and someone shared back with me that she described you walking through it with strength and grace. And I said, yeah, it's really my prayer now, you know, when I pray for anyone that I love, like if one of my friends is going through something, that I pray that they have the strength to get through what they're experiencing, but also that they can do it with grace. And I think all the teachings and things that the practices, really all the practices we do, I think support us in living that way. You know, so thank you for saying that. I really am so grateful that my life has been a mixture of, you know, all the joys that it has, and oddly enough, grateful for the challenges as well.
It gives us the insight, right? It gives us the wisdom when we have that my mom always used to quote Kahil Gibran, in that pain is the breaking of the shell that encloses our understanding. And I always love that quote.
I love that one too. Gibran is one of my favorites. And on the chapter in The Prophet where he describes sorrow, he describes it as that well, and he says the depth of that well of sorrow is the same depth of your joy. And it's so true, you know, like if we're living shallow, we wouldn't suffer, you know, but when we live a deep life of love, and really we know that there's suffering then, you know. We wouldn't trade that for the depth of our love.
And it's a little bit scary, right? Because of the impermanence. I think when we really are living in that space of love and feeling and presence, we also something in us knows how impermanent it all is too. And it's easy to try and go shallow again, like not be present and not be, in that place of love and awareness.
Yes. Yeah. I think one of the greatest gifts of Patabi Joyce and his teachings is that it's a practice, right? Like every day you just wake up and really try to ground yourself in what's most important to you, and to practice loving, and to practice not being afraid to love, and to practice, I used to joke around with my students and say, we'd have conference and Sharat would say, who has questions, intelligent questions only.
Yeah.
And right. And someone would ask a question about like, this or that. And Guruji would say, you taking practice. And it would be totally perfect. You're like, yeah, exactly. Then the next person would raise their hand. Then there's the question about something else, this or that. And Patabi would say, yes, you must practice. Practice.
Yeah.
I was like, you know what? It was never like he couldn't think of another answer. I'm like, it was always like so spot on. But isn't it true though? Like I think about that harmony where it's like, we make these decisions or commitments or whatever, like to choose how we want to live. And now we just have to wake up every day and really hold to that, It is a practice.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, I love that.
Well, I know you have to get going. We're right up against your time.
We're keeping you on time today.
But, yes, make sure I get there on time.
Yeah.
Tell everyone where they can come and practice with you, and if we're ever in the area, we'll come practice with you.
I like a silent room.
Yes, you don't like a lot of jibber jabber.
No.
You can come and practice with me in Capistrano Beach, California, which is really the bigger, is Dana Point, California. And you can find us at pacificashtanga.com. We Zoom, and so I have people Zooming from all over the United States, and every now and then someone from another country. And conferences, if you sign up for our emails, you'll get not only the weekly conference from me, the teaching, but my mom, whose name is Patricia. My students love my mother, and she once a week puts out something called Sunday Morning Musings with Patricia, which is
Patty
really
O'Shea, the Irish mom. My goodness.
Yeah, so some cool little inspirations from my mama once a week too. Like it's a family business, right? What can I say? My mom is. If my mom's not signing you in for class, which she can't anymore, she's going to send you a little love. So yeah, that's what we have. And then the book is the DianaChristinson.com is the book, but we kind of try to weave them all together. And there's courses for the book online and all kinds of good stuff like that as well. We're just about to start a 45-day summer journey for anyone that wants to, like the Camino de Santiago, like walk this pilgrimage personally, but also as a collective. So the first day of summer is June 21st. And we're going to ask everyone to start their first day on June 21st and walk for 45 days of inspiration and meditation. So
that's also Harmony's birthday. So it's a good day to start.
I'll start.
Your book is on its way.
Oh, thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
45 days. Let's do
We're
it.
gonna do it.
It's beautiful. Well, I'm just so pleased that you came on our little podcast, and thank you so much for sharing so openly, so much joy and gratitude and heart connection there. So
thank you, Diana.
Thank you so much, Harmony. Thank you, Russell. Blessings to both of you and your path of light. Continue to be a light for others as you are.
Yes, you too. A light warrior.
Yes.